Regardless of the platform, video games offer a variety of rich animations, be it in full-motion video cutscenes or abundant in-game engine animations. The in-game engine animations are the real source of Medium's potential. It is where a talented artist is able to tell a story using body language and limited graphics. Video game animators, like cartoon animators, are responsible for portraying movement and behavior. They bring to life characters and creatures, and apply their skills to objects, scenery, and environmental effects. Whether the game is stylized or a photorealistic, animators must create emotionally believable characters that allow the player to interact with the game in a realistic way. The major distinction between games and films lies within the medium's objectives. The goal of film animation is to serve the story or narrative, and in video games, the animation's goal is to serve the gameplay, so the game player can create his own story. While voiceover and scripted story sequences are commonplace in today's games, the artist's task is to inject as much as possible of personality into the player's avatar. Video game animations will have a lot of body movements such as running, walking, swinging, sword, and a lot of them will be cycled. This is where many restrictions come into play. Since a player commands the character, an artist is given a task of creating believable movements that can be transitioned to at a moment notice. Much of this affects how much anticipation is handled. In games, an animator will be asked to strike a fine balance between instantaneous character response and believable movement. Technological limitations further challenge this process, such as engines, frame rate. The anticipation in video game animation could be just a few frames. If the frame rate is slow and those few frames are skipped, then the player will not see the anticipation at all, which lessens the impact and the believability of the animation. This can be overcome by creative planning and the abbreviation of movements. Modern games use diverse animation techniques and styles. Though the majority achieved 3D through Maya and 3ds Max software, this opens up new considerations. In traditional animation, the focus is placed on the action within the frame, yet video games allow us to view the events from nearly any angle, thus requiring a universal approach and wide attention to detail. In video game animation, there are two methods of bringing virtual characters to life: motion capture and hand keying. With motion capture, the animator uses data collected by the motion capture artist as a framework on which to lay character design. The animator imports the information from the motion sequences into the 3D modeling program like Maya or 3ds Max. He or she then applies the character model by mapping the recorded motion data onto the corresponding points on the 3D figure to be animated. This technique allows the animator to give his or her character motion that is lifelike and fluid. In hand keying, the animator takes the figure built by character rigging and physically manipulated each motion through the use of software animation and action editing tools. The animator sets keys or movement instructions to individual bones and joints. Games are meant to be interactive. When you play a game, you will have complete control of the character and the camera. You are the one driving the story forward and making the character move. So not only does the animation need to look good, it needs to look good from every possible angle. If the game is a third person and the player rotates the camera around, they will see the wall cycle from completely new angle. This new angle can reveal things like knee pops that may not have been visible in a normal camera view. These are things that a game animator needs to take into account to ensure their animation holds up to whatever this player might throw at it. Unlike animation in a movie where the animator doesn't need to worry about how it will look from a side view or from behind, creating animations for games need to look good from any angle. For instance, when implementing the principle of arcs into an animation, the animator needs to ensure that the character is following nice, smooth arcing motions from any camera angle. As a game animator, you will be exposed to many more types of animation than what is typically found in a movie. You may find yourself creating animations for fantasy creatures, giants, combat maneuvers, scripted events, And you will do many different types of cycles, not just walking or run cycles. For instance, most games will need to have breathing cycles, an idle stance cycle when the character is standing still, crouching and walking forward while aiming a gun, laying down and crawling forward, and the list goes on. Most games are driven by body mechanics. You will need to spend a lot of time perfecting your body mechanics to be successful in games. That's not to say you won't be animating any acting scenes, but if you look back at the last video game you played, you'll probably see just how body mechanics heavy it is. The timing for animation in games is often determined by the needs of the player inputs. Nothing is more frustrating than getting caught in a gunfight in Call of Duty, for example, and suddenly having to reload, typically resulting in your death. But those reloads animation have to be timed perfectly to enhance the gameplay. For instance, you want to reload the animation to be fast enough so the player gets back to the action, but also slow enough to be realistic and to be seen by the player. Typically, each animation you are given must be completed in a much shorter amount of time than a film. It's not uncommon in feature film animations for an animator to have several months to finish a single shot, depending on how complex it is. In games, the turnaround is much faster. While the animation may need to be as perfected as a movie, they still must look good in a game. The number of passes you can have on a single animation are often much smaller, simply because you won't have the time to go from blocking to blocking 1 to blocking 2 to blocking 3. You will need to find ways to get from blocking to the finish animation in a short period of time. Since there is less time to refine your work, you will need to have greater understanding of the animation and the purpose of it, and what you want the player to feel. Game animation isn't about creating top-notch performances, but about ensuring that the animation will work well with the player, or for the player. While there is a huge emphasis on body mechanics in game animation, there is still a need to push the story forward. And as hardware progresses, games are becoming even more story-driven. For instance, look at the Uncharted series or The Last of Us as an example of a story-driven game. Video games are typically a much more realistic style of animation. Of course, there are more stylized animations in games, but for the most part, games try to be grounded in realism to help keep the player engrossed in the gameplay. To ensure the game is realistic as possible, motion capture is a technique that is being used more often, especially for the more subtle acting cutscenes like you would find in The Last of Us. As a video game animator, motion capture is something you need to become familiar with, because more studios are implementing it into their pipeline. Motion capture technology is a good example of how digital techniques are being applied to the video game industry to allow more convincing visualization of imaginary images. For motion capture, you use human actors who are dressed in bodysuits with integral reflective or magnetic markers. The actor performs the actions that are required, and the digital cameras or array of cameras capture the motion of the reflective markers. This technology basically replaced the old ways of animating game characters because it is fast and way more accurate. In addition to recording motion capture, the artist is responsible for setting up shots, fitting the actor with the necessary marker suit, and preparing specialized props. Before beginning to capture the motion from actor suits, the artist creates a primary 3D character using video capture software. Within the help of the software pipeline like Maya and Motion Builder, motion capture artists add texture to the scene and edit footage, cleaning up and correcting the motion captured data in individual frames. Everything from skin, hair, and clothing is added digitally. This does not mean that traditional animation is not needed, but you will often need to use motion capture data as a starting point in your animations and build from there. As with theatrical CG, the choice between mocap and keyframe exists. Some games require a cartoony style, that only time-consuming CAD animation can reproduce, while others benefit from the tangible realism of mocap, though an extensive cleaning up process may be necessary. Video game animation offers a plethora of exciting opportunities and hurdles. For those involved, this digital playground offers a rich and rewarding experience, creating animations that connects to the audience and on a more personal level than ever before. I hope this video was useful and aided you with the tools and the information necessary in order to understand how video game animation works. And you can share with us your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.